Revenge Resolved by Philip Johnson. So the murder of retired teacher Jonathan Givens from Stoke-on-Trent, which took place in Bournemouth, is back on the agenda, and the three original suspects from the Potteries are once more in the spotlight. 2020 was, in some ways, the best of times. People looking out for each other, people suddenly valuing each other rather than money and material possessions, and people finally realising that all life is precious and we're only given a finite amount of it. It's also the moment in modern history when people on humble, negligible even incomes, such as nurses, carers, delivery drivers, supermarket workers, transport workers, were finally recognised as being of significantly greater value to society than, say, bankers or hedge fund managers, solicitors or chief executives. Pound for pound, what the former group provide for us compared to the latter group is indeed immeasurable. But 2020 was also the worst of times. Tens of thousands of deaths in the UK alone, and a seemingly long, frightening struggle ahead with the fear of lost jobs, lost childhoods, and potentially the loss of our old comforts, all caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. The police killing of George Floyd finally, at last, ensured that one race of people developed a communal conscience that, yes, they really are privileged and unfairly prosperous compared to another race so evidently disadvantaged. So this was the backdrop, then, to what was happening in Britain. And in terms of the 2018 Jonathan Givens murder in Bournemouth, there was also an important development. Throughout March, April, May and June of that year, the Paradise Hotel, where Givens used to work, was forced to close due to the global pandemic. Staff were furloughed, and by the time June came around, its owner, Mr. Jensen, had a decision to make. Do we carry on or sell the property to a national care homes organisation who are desperate to expand their portfolio in Dorset? Bournemouth had always been a retirement-friendly town. People enjoyed its faux Riviera reputation of being, in the same sense as Torquay, slightly more tropical and Mediterranean than the rest of England. So in the same way that New Yorkers might consider Florida as the place to retire to, Brits often chose Bournemouth. Against this background, the care home company known as AAA, that's Age-Appropriate Accommodation, purchased the Paradise Hotel mid-June 2020, and by the first week of July had set about getting the building in preparation for its transformation by gutting it. It was going to be made into a residential home complete with ensuite bedrooms, full restaurant and cafe facilities, and music, bingo, cinema nights, etc. The whole operation would take several months, and it was hoped that the first occupants could take up rooms by January 2021. But something extraordinary happened when the first contractors moved in on the 6th of July 2020. A restyling of the property had been taking place amongst the company's in-house design team for the previous 6 weeks whilst the acquisition was being considered and prepared. Those first few days of work would involve simply tearing out old carpets, ripping wallpaper from the walls and discarding old bed mattresses, curtains and so on. Several skips waited in the car park. Jonathan Givens was a retired teacher who had absconded from Stoke to Bournemouth in 2014 to escape assault charges. He had met a grisly death on the beachfront in Bournemouth in 2018. You need to see the previous short stories, Revenge Condition and Revenge Rebound, to see all the details. His single bedroom at the hotel had been in the basement where he had been working as bar manager. Now, when one of the contractors, Steve, entered this room, he immediately sensed an uneven floor and wobbly board. On lifting the loose floorboard, he spotted a metal box underneath which contained an old Motorola pay-as-you-go mobile telephone and £14,225 in cash. True, the contractor shovelled a fistful of dollars into a zipped pocket, as he was sure no one else from the team was lurking. He then called out to his supervisor in the adjacent corridor. "Oi, Tony, what we got here then?" They quickly counted the money, minus the figure that Steve had stashed in his trousers, and came to the conclusion that almost 10 grand of cash, plus a dodgy old phone, perhaps should be reported, as the guys on site had already been chatting about that murder that took place a couple of years before, involving a Paradise Hotel employee. So, this just might be a connection. Supervisor Tony passed it on to his line manager at AAA Residential Homes, and the managing director decided to contact Mr. Jensen, former manager of the Paradise Hotel, who confirmed that the basement hotel single bedroom had actually been where Mr. Givens, aka Mike Redford, had lived. This information needed to be shared with police. Detective Inspector Frank Jameson happened to be on duty when the call came through from a desk officer. His first thoughts were, how cruel, how ironic that crucial evidence should come to light now that his former sidekick, DS John Dean, had retired. The Givens Beach murder had been John's final case, and although he was convinced that 3 young men who'd been assaulted by Givens a few years before were his killers, he couldn't quite nudge the case over the finishing line, and the Crown Prosecution Service had rejected charges being made. Frank's second set of thoughts were, OK, this phone is almost certainly going to have belonged to Givens. But it's not the physical evidence that's going to be so revealing. It's going to be the outgoing and incoming calls made from and to that phone, which could potentially solve the conundrum. As much as Frank would love to have contacted his old pal, Jimmy Dean, to give him the heartening news, he knew it was early days in the process, and even gaining access to the catalogue of in and out calls to a phone can be laborious. Without Mr. Givens' PIN code and passwords, this would prove time-consuming. So, Mr. Givens' estate had £9,375 added to it, which his deceased cousin's son would presumably now inherit. But it was the telephone which was of great interest to D.I. Jameson. Dorset Constabulary did not have a particularly advanced IT code-cracking department, but neighbouring Hampshire did. And so the phone was initially sent to Southampton, where a tech guru would be firstly trying out a series of PIN codes based on numbers significant to Mr. Givens, such as his birthday and those of his parents. If that failed, there would be various other algorithmic programs which could sift out and search for ways to enter the depths of data held on the SIM card. This might take a week or more, which was fine, and Frank decided that any information would be securely held between he and C.S. Loretta Squires, sometimes given the nickname Felicity, away from her ears, as there was a passing resemblance to the actress Felicity Kendall. Jameson smirked to himself as he recalled John Dean used to whisper to him, "If C.S. Felicity wasn't such a posh, frigid cow, I'd consider giving her one, wouldn't you?" Frank would just giggle, but never respond in the affirmative. So D.I. Jameson cracked on with the other duties and other cases for the next 10 days. But he was a touch excited when the phone finally returned to Dorset with accompanying information. The phone had been in a batch circulating the West Midlands from 2011 onwards, so Givens had probably purchased it in Stoke-on-Trent, probably from a market stall in the period prior to him absconding to Bournemouth in 2014. But the SIM card had been purchased at a Christmas market stall in Bournemouth during December 2017, just a few months before he met his death. So presumably the phone itself would have been untouched, unused for quite a period before Jonathan decided to activate it. But it was the inventory of phone calls which were the most illuminating aspect of the phone. Several calls throughout December, January were made to a number which triangulation of mobile telephone masts revealed to be always taken in the Salisbury area, just 28 miles away and about 45 minutes by car. But perhaps more significantly were the 19 calls and texts to and from a mobile phone throughout March and early April 2018, just prior to Jonathan's murder. Triangulation reports revealed that these later calls were to and from Stoke-on-Trent. Frank hated to use the naff colloquialisms his predecessor used to use, but he couldn't help a huge gotcha to himself. This must be the breakthrough, but at the same time, I must keep it to myself. Any hint of anyone in Stoke getting hold of this info and then passing it on to any of those three lads, and we'll be at a huge disadvantage. First, there was the Salisbury link to sort. The phone company provided details of the owner of that particular phone, a divorced Mrs. Sally Thomas. A visit to her home quickly established that she'd met Jonathan in his capacity as barman in November 2017 at a wedding she'd attended at the Paradise Hotel. Her ex-husband had been a military man up at Salisbury, but a posting in Canada 10 years previously had led to him meeting someone else and never returning to the UK. She'd felt that her and Jonathan were kind of kindred spirits in that they seemed like lost ships in the night. And although she was a few years younger than Mr. Givens, she found his uncomplicated and calm manner most reassuring. Jonathan had a phone, his old Motorola model hidden in his room, but no SIM card. But he promised Sally that he'd purchase one. Once she knew he was good at his word, a few conversational calls took place between them. She visited him twice, either side of New Year, for walks along the beach, and he reciprocated just the once, using public transport and then coffees in central Salisbury. And that was as far as it went. Frank was reasonably satisfied with this explanation, but just to be on the safe side, he suggested further questioning may need to take place. What Frank really needed to do was formulate a strategy that would send him north to Stoke-on-Trent. He'd need to run it past C.S. Loretta Squires first, and his discussions with her had become slightly troubling just recently. She'd always had quite an abrupt style to her when she dealt with D.S. John Dean, but with John out of the way, her tone with Frank had softened, become more inclusive, and that she requested his opinions on quite personal matters. And Frank realised their relationship was no longer 100% professional. He needed her approval, though, on his piecing together a team which would ultimately repeat the journey of 2 years ago, when all three suspects were originally arrested. This time, though, they'd collect all their evidence beforehand. He was determined they'd not wriggle out of a tight spot yet again. And so, Frankie approached C.S. Loretta Squire's door tentatively, not quite the same spring in his step as when he used to be accompanied by the brazen John Dean. Squire's PA wafted Frank through, and he'd always try to breeze through the initial pleasantries as quickly as possible so they could knuckle down to serious business. C.S. Loretta Squires commenced the meeting thus. "Well, hello, D.I. Jameson. always an absolute pleasure to have you seated opposite me, so I've got you all to myself. Likewise, Ma'am. Francis, I think we can do without the formalities of Ma'am. It's Loretta to you. I insist. Oh, right. Felicity. I mean Loretta. Right. Yeah, well, there have been some developments with the... Yes, I'm sure. But wouldn't it make for a more convivial tete-a-tete if we had coffee served? I'll call Maggie, my trusty PA. Maggie, dear, coffee for 2, please. Biscuits, the works. No biscuits for me, thanks, Ma'am. Loretta. I thought so. A man as chiselled as yourself, almost sculpted, wouldn't abuse your body with treats like that. Yeah, it's the occasional weekend triathlons, Ma'am. Yes, all that cycling, all that swimming, all that running. Surprised you've got any energy left for anything else, Francis, huh? Well, that's the discipline, Loretta. Good food to fuel the body, plenty of sleep, that's the key. Anyway, Jonathan Givens, a.k.a. Mike Redford. The murder from April 2018. Yes, there's been some excitement higher up the command chain. What's the latest? At last D.I. Jameson had engineered the conversation his way. Well, the old Paradise Hotel was in the process of being converted into a retirement home. And in Givens' room, an old mobile phone and cash has been concealed in a metal box under the floorboards. Some intriguing information has been lifted from the phone thanks to our tech genius over at Southampton. A series of texts to a lady in Salisbury in early 2018 have already been explained away by a brief relationship, if you can call it that, between Givens and a Mrs. Sally Thomas, a divorcee. Ugh, it sounds so sordid. I'm afraid it's not even that interesting, Ma'am. The team has visited Ms. Thomas, and other than coffee meetings and a walk on the beach, that was about it. She said 2018 was memorable in Salisbury for the Russian spy being poisoned, but definitely not memorable in terms of Mr. Dull himself, Jonathan Givens. It's slightly later in the year when the phone activity kicks off proper. Now, you'll remember there had been a David Bowie tribute weekend at the hotel early Feb 18, when 4 ladies from Stoke attended. Closer examination, I feel, of the girls needs to take place because one of them, Sue Doyle, worked with suspect Beaumont at a hotel, and another of the girls, Jackie Burrows, is very friendly with Hannah, sister of another suspect, Tomlinson. Now, it's strange that within a couple of weeks, Givens is getting calls from a burner phone in Stoke-on-Trent, including texts, and then a few weeks later, he's lying in his own blood on Bournemouth Beach. I do like the precise and succinct way in which you describe your current projects, Francis. It's clear, it's concise, and you only divulge absolutely necessary, vital details. Some of the wafflers we have in here have me switching off within a minute. Your friend Dean enjoyed listening to the sound of his own voice. I did promise I'd keep him up to speed about the Givens case. What are your thoughts on that, Francis? Well, Ma'am, as much as I got on with D.S. Dean and his detective attributes are without question, I think I'd be inclined to not inform him about these developments because A, I think he'd come running in excitedly and want to be part of the inquiry, plus B, I don't think it would do his general health much good, as he has so much emotion invested in the case, and he now does have blood pressure issues, so I've heard. Unlike yours, Francis, no doubt yours is exactly what it should be. What with all that training and generally being the Dorset Constabulary's version of Bear Grylls. Well, Mum, I suppose 6 years in the Rifles Battalion in Aldershot didn't harm my general fitness levels, but 18 years in the police, much of it as a detective, doesn't quite keep you at the same levels as when I was in the army, to be fair. Oh, Francis, you're much too modest from where I'm sitting. I can only see a taut, physically confident, ready and able officer. I'm impressed anyway. Thanks, right. Well, OK, I feel one of those two girls from Stoke could be the link to the three suspects who then possibly started contacting Givens with a view to a kill, or... Yes, or a view to rekindling acquaintances, or a view to dishing out a little retribution, not murder, or even, have you considered blackmail? I mean, a stash of cash has been found in the victim's old bedroom. Do you not think those three might have been more interested in something as dirty as money, rather than knifing someone and risk many, many years behind bars? Yes, Mom, that's exactly what I was coming on to. Loretta, don't forget. Yes, Loretta. We have our legal team in contact with TalkTalk and O2. Mr. Given's SIM card was purchased with TalkTalk capacity. The dodgy burner phone in Stoke has an O2 SIM card. It could take a few days to unlock that information, re actual text and actual phone conversation recordings, but once it comes in, I feel we'll be ready to do business. But I think our first line of attack should be the two girls who attended the David Bowie tribute weekend, because I've still got a feeling that they might have been the ones who unconsciously, deliberately passed on the whereabouts of Jonathan Givens to the three lads. Oh, Francis, I could just sit here and listen to you all day. Your logistical and operational mind goes into overdrive when it comes to police matters. Whatever you think we should do will always be rubber-stamped by myself. Oh, and I've got another surprise for you. What's that then, Ma'am? I mean, Loretta. I've spoken to my superiors, as well as the local authorities' police standards committee. I've told them that people connected with the tourism industry, and thank God they're all opening for business now after that dreadful COVID. They're concerned that we still have a beachfront slaughter unsolved, which could be harming Bournemouth's reputation. Therefore, we're throwing multiple resources at this one. And, this is the juicy bit, we're a little short of senior investigating officers at present, and so, in the absence of a suitable DS for this case, there's literally no one available, and you know the facts of the case inside out anyway. We want you to lead this inquiry, a DS remuneration. I'll bet your wife and family will love the extra money, yes? Very, very good of you, Loretta. I don't think they'll appreciate the 18-hour days I'm probably going to be putting in, but every cloud and all that, I mustn't grumble, keep it professional like. You have nothing to be grateful for, Francis. I put forward your name for this 3-month temporary promotion because you've earned it. Besides, it'll give us even more time to get to know each other better with all those overtime hours you'll be spending at the office. You do have your future career to think of. If this goes well, who knows? The powers that be might want to make it permanent. Right, well, I'd better keep you updated then, Mom, with all the developments. I mean, Loretta. You must, please do. That predecessor of yours, D.I. Dean, he used to say he'd keep me in the loop and then he'd go off and do his own thing because he knew I'd have never agreed to some of his, shall we say, unorthodox procedures. Okay, yeah, I'd better get researching then what these two girls are up to these days and try and establish a link with the fellas. Bravo. I wish you all the very best, Francis, and as you know, my door is always open. Don't be a stranger. Thanks very much, Loretta. D.I. Jameson stepped away from that meeting feeling rather pleased with himself career-wise and in terms of the Givens investigation, but just a little uneasy at Miss Squire's blatant interest in him. Providing he could keep it away from his wife, son and daughter, he assessed that the situation was one he could cope with. Jameson jumped straight into fourth gear, addressing the team, Dean's old team. But for this inquiry, it was his team. OK, guys, there's been some movement higher up in the command. We're targeting the two ladies who were at that shit Bowie weekend. Yes, I know, Simon, Bowie was your hero, but I've seen video footage of that tribute band. What were their name? Genie. Oh, yeah, sorry, Ziggy Stardust. And to tell you the truth, stick a wig on me, slap some makeup on and some high-heeled boots, and I think I'd be more convincing. Now, I'm just about to contact Stoke Police. They'll grab them, take them to separate stations for interrogation. By that time, I'll have had a car to take me up there, and I'm going to ask the original DI who was involved in the assaults on the three lads. John Spencer. Yes, I know he's a bit of a plonker, bit of an anarch who does everything by the book, but I feel he's the sort of studious, incisive detective who won't let anything past him. Know what I mean? One of these birds is the key. Did I just say birds? Bloody hell, I really did spend too much time with John Dean, didn't I? One of these ladies is going to provide the link with the three perps. That's perpetrators to you, David. I know you don't always keep up with the latest terminology. So, we'll be grilling Sue Doyle and Jackie Burrows, and I'll bet anyone in this room, one of them, told one of the three fellas about the whereabouts of one Jonathan Givens, a.k.a. Mike Radford. Simon, book me a car. David, get on to Stoke. Let's set it up for tomorrow. And Becky, I might have a very special role for you. Come on, team, onwards and upwards. And so, Staffordshire Police contacted both of the ladies in question and said they were required to attend interviews the following day on extremely urgent matters, but nevertheless they were not in any trouble themselves and they'd actually be assisting an important investigation. Now that lockdown restrictions had been lifted considerably, Mr. Jameson met his opposite, D.I. John Spencer from Stoke, in Frank's room at the Moat House Hotel, Stoke, and chatted through some strategic lines they could follow. This was a newer initiative whereby one police force could enlist or second the help of another police force if it could be shown that the other police force had knowledge of details, witnesses, victims and suspects from previous inquiries. So although D.I. Spencer only investigated the assaults on the three lads, allegedly by Givens, he would ultimately have important facts at his fingertips which would be beneficial to Jameson as he pursued the killer or killers of Givens. At quite a late stage on that Thursday evening, the 30th of July 2020, Jameson announced a surprise change in tactics. He would initially only interview Sue Doyle. There were operational reasons for this he couldn't divulge at that stage. But he'd formulated a plan with Spencer and he'd see it through. He'd asked PC Becky Waddington if she wanted to be part of something different, something a bit special, and she'd answered in the affirmative. So Jameson had booked a room for Becky, also indefinitely, and she'd travel to Stoke by train the next day. So, at 9 a.m. sharp, the new pairing of Dorset's D.I. Jameson, acting up as DC, and Stoke's D.I. Spencer met Sue Doyle, who you might remember from the middle story in the trilogy Revenge Rebound, had attended the Paradise Hotel for the David Bowie weekend. But there were other connections to prise open from her if she was willing. And so the interview started. Jameson. Miss Susan Doyle, date of birth 17/8/81 and currently residing at Etruria in the city of Stoke-on-Trent. I am Detective Inspector Frank Jameson of Dorset Police, currently acting in the role of Detective Superintendent. And this is my colleague for this particular investigation, Detective Inspector John Spencer, who is based in Stoke. Are you happy to consider a series of questions we'd like to put to you? Spencer intervened. Miss Doyle, you are under no obligation to cooperate. You may decide to leave this facility at any time you wish. You are entitled to have legal representation if you so wish, and you may pause or indeed stop the proceedings at any time you deem to be appropriate. Miss Doyle responded, "Well, thanks very much, guys. I haven't got anything to hide, so let's crack on. I'm on duty in a couple of hours and I don't want them twats docking me pay, do I? Do you know what I mean?" Spencer, "Precisely, Miss Doyle. Just to cover a little housekeeping, if you require the restrooms, they are situated to your right, tea and coffee making conveniences are to your left, and in the unlikely event of a fire..." Jameson butted in. Yes, all right, D.I. Spencer, you heard our client. She doesn't have all day. Moving on. It has come to our attention that you attended a David Bowie tribute weekend at the Paradise Hotel 2.5 years ago. Is that correct? It is, officer. God, it was a pile of shit as well. We only drove through that sodding beast from the east as well. I mean, a 3.5 hour journey. It became 6 hours. We shouldn't have ploughed on, really. I only went because my cousin, our Betty, talked us into it. She's a lot older than me, and her Tony had just run off with Linda from Lidl. So I just went there out of pity for her, like. I drew the line at going Northern Soul, though, because... God, they are a bunch of old fossils and dinosaurs. Well, I suppose not as bad as rock and roll and Elvis and Buddy and all that shit, I suppose, but I'm sure you catch me drift. Spencer seemed confused. Oh, right, well, very well, okay, so you're in the Paradise Hotel, Bournemouth. Perhaps Prosecco is flowing, temperatures rising, there's dancing and general frivolity. Do you recall at any time one of your group taking selfies or group snaps of your little gang with perhaps other people connected with maybe the band or with the hotel? Well, once the other girls were oiled up, they started talking crap about the bass guitarist being dead fit. I kept saying you need to go to Specsavers and stuff like that, but for me, the whole weekend fell apart. Once the guy pretending to be Bowie, well, he got a bit too excited singing, "Let's dance," and he shook his head a bit too vigorously and his frigging wig came off. Prat. Jameson continued. Sounds like a class act, that does. So we won't be seeing them on X Factor or Britain's Got Talent anytime soon then, Sue. Only if they rename the bloody show Britain's Got No Talent. Do you know what I mean, Duck? Jameson responded, I do, unfortunately. I do know what you mean. Jameson had taken the decision to gently ease Miss Doyle into a friendly repartee, which made her feel comfortable, and was more likely to get results than D.I. Spencer's detailed and exact vocabulary style. Jameson continued, Now, never mind the bass guitarist and the lead singer. Were there any other punters who anyone in your party took a shine to or enjoyed a bit of banter with, perhaps? Miss Doyle responded, Well, our Betty's mate, Dawn, for some reason seemed to hit it off with this ancient barman Mick or Matt or something like that. Mind you, she's no spring chicken herself, so I don't know why I'm being that tight about the fella. Spencer interjected, Mike, I think you'll find the barman was named Mike. Oh, right. Because I was asked by a work colleague what his actual name was, and then it was a right mither, because I had to get in touch with our Betty, who then had to contact this Dawn to get the name of this Mike Tosser. Tosser, did you say? Why Tosser, Sue? Bit strong, that. Miss Doyle responded, Well, he were dead boring. All night, that Mike guy, a scouser he was, or so we thought. And then after the last orders, he joined us on the floor and we're getting a bit, frisky with Dawn. And then he says, Do you want to join us in me basement room for coffee, Duck? And we all shouted, Duck! No way, you're not a Scouser, you're a Stokey, you lying toad. He got all defensive and said he'd heard us calling each other duck throughout the night and it was just a bit of playful mimicking. We said, have you got something to hide, Mr. Shady? Are you on the run or something? And what was his response to that, Miss Doyle? Well, he just went all quiet and retreated back behind the bar. It was as if he'd let his guard down for 60 seconds, got caught up in the atmosphere of dancing to the lyrics, but we could be heroes just for one day. And then he quickly regretted it and wanted to pack it all up in a box again. That's what I think anyhow, but I aren't a psychiatrist or out. I'm just a kook around the corner at the Moathouse Hotel. Jameson responded, and isn't it right you're in a WhatsApp group of 20 plus members at the Moathouse Hotel, Sue? Miss Doyle responded, bloody hell, you've done your own work, haven't you? How'd you find out all that stuff? Are you on first name terms with Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates? And they just hand this information over to you? Jameson, something like that, Sue. Now, where were we? So you've come back from Bournemouth, you've posted a few photos of your crazy weekend, and Sue responded, you mean not crazy, but shit weekend? Jameson, OK, your shit weekend on WhatsApp, because everyone likes to give the impression to friends and colleagues that you've actually gone out there and lived a little. It's a bit like that, isn't it, Sue? Competitive. You're not kidding. That's why we disbanded the group, because some people were always posing and boasting who they'd pulled and how pissed they were every weekend, while the married folk had nothing much to say apart from I did me mum shopping or I took our little Destiny to Primark, that sort of thing. So in the end, there was a kind of split between those who had too much to pig in post and those who had zilch to post. Spencer, but the WhatsApp group was still operative and functional in February 2018, Miss Doyle. Miss Doyle, yes, definitely, and I'll tell you how I remember. I put a few pickies up of us dancing in Bournemouth, and there was just one where we grabbed the bar fella. The moment our Betty pulled her camera out, he did a quick turn to the side thinking we wouldn't capture his face, but we did. And when that went up on the Moathouse group page, I had an immediate visit in the kitchens from the barman here, Loza. I think his name's Lawrence. Weird lad, not much work in him. And I've heard he's always got his mum and sister of... Sorry, officer. Can I have a drink of water? Anyway, like I was saying, he's always got his mum and sister hovering round him in the bar, this Loza. Like as if he's 12 years old or something. And he needs, as if he needs chaperoning. D.I. Jameson then asked a question he already knew the answer to. What did he want when he came to see you? Sue explained. Well, Lawrence tried to be all sheepish at first. You see this bloke here in this photo on your WhatsApp selfie? He looks a bit familiar and stuff like that. And then he tried to make out, maybe it was my old man used to work with him. That sort of thing. But eventually he spit it out. I'm sure he's my old primary school teacher. Did you catch his name while you were in Bournemouth? Well, like I said, I then had to ask our Betty, to ask Dawn, etc. And just by chance, Dawn had stumbled across an old bill at the bottom of her bag. And it was an invoice for our drinks tab at the Paradise Hotel, signed by the bar manager, that Mike fella. Frank joked. Big bill, Sue, the tab. Bloody hell, don't ask me. That's all I'm saying. Don't ask me on that one. Frank continued. Do you have any idea why Lawrence Beaumont, Loza, might have been so interested in a fellow barman who was working on the south coast? Sue responded. No idea, and I don't want to know either. I take care of no one's business but my own. I like it that way, and I wasn't interested what his game was as long as he didn't involve me. Spencer. Miss Doyle, you have successfully confirmed for us that Mr. Beaumont did in fact have access to a photograph of Mr. Mike Radford, and that he was informed that Radford's residence was indeed the Paradise Hotel, Bournemouth. That was the sole reason for us inviting you in today. You have been most cooperative, but I must warn you that today's discussions are strictly confidential. None of our conversations should be divulged and shared with anyone, as there is an ongoing investigation taking place at present, which could be seriously compromised if you were to reveal details to any hotel staff who could inform Mr. Lawrence Beaumont. Have I made myself clear? For the purposes of the tape recording, you understand? I do, yes, God. Sounds like something really serious is going down. Jameson. Yes, you could say that, Sue. It's imperative you keep stum for us, love. That means not mentioning any of this to the 3 other girls who attended that shit Bowie weekend with you, if you don't mind. We may well have to call you at some point in the future as a witness. You haven't dropped anyone in it. You haven't snitched on anyone. Don't forget, we came looking for you after we checked all the guests who'd stayed at the Paradise Hotel over a certain period of time. Paradise, that's a good one. What a godforsaken hole it was. My ex-colleague John Dean used to say that funnily enough, not sure how he had so much inside info on the place. I'd rather not know, if I'm honest. Now, you've been most helpful, Sue. It was an absolute pleasure meeting you. And if we need you to corroborate all of the information you've provided today, we'll probably call in your 3 friends as well. And then you don't have to feel all the spotlights on you. Would that help? Yes, it would. Thank you very much, officer. I was happy to help as long as it don't get me in any mither with anyone like. We've got your back, Sue. Just enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks again. Ta-ra, Shug. Jameson and Spencer stared at each other as Sue Doyle was escorted from the premises. A sense of satisfaction filled Jameson, but he knew that he couldn't get too excited yet. He and his opposite at Stoke, John Spencer, had discussed a significant role for the young rising star of Dorset Constabulary, Becky Waddington, to fulfil. Miss Aisha Khan, general manager at the hotel, had been in touch recently with Dorset, asking to speak to D.S. Dean. As John had now retired, she'd been put in touch with Frank, John Dean's old number 2. Miss Khan had remembered Dorset being particularly interested in not Lawrence Beaumont's mother and sister being regular visitors to the bar he was supposed to be running, but by the whisperings and hushed tones which he spoke in whenever Francis Harris was employed there as security for functions such as weddings and dinner dances. More recently, though, Miss Khan had noticed another character who attended the bar most, but not every, Friday and Saturday night. Beaumont seemed relaxed and friendly enough with all the other clients who used the facility, but he undertook a bit of a suspicious transformation whenever this regular customer showed up. She'd had trouble putting her finger on what it was exactly about Beaumont's demeanour which altered, but said it was very similar to when Harris visited. In other words, looking over his shoulder, checking no one was in, listening, proximity, and sometimes even appearing to communicate via nods, facial expressions, hand gestures, and raised eyebrows or frowns. She knew that this mystery guest was not a resident of the hotel and was not a member of the hotel gym. It played on her mind so much that she'd even filmed the conversations, if you could call them conversations, and sent clips to Dorset to illustrate what she thought might be going on. Dorset took one look at them laughed and announced, "Tomlinson, now we have evidence that the three musketeers, the three amigos, are all in contact with each other. Or, as D.S. Dean used to call them, the ultimate trio of twats." Miss Waddington would be arriving from Bournemouth and Frank would only have a couple of hours to rehearse tactics. Becky was delivered to Frank's room, and in just a short amount of time, she'd needed to get it in her head that she was PA to a very important advertising sales executive who was meeting none other than the Coates family of the Bet365 Empire HQ, also on the Festival Park estate in the centre of Stoke. The story would be that her boss was upstairs in his hotel room practising his big presentation to the Bet365 bigwigs next day, while he'd given Becky a couple of hours R&R in the bar area to relax. There she would attract the attention of one Jake Tomlinson, who they'd already established was a regular at the hotel bar Fridays and Saturdays, and she'd encourage him to talk about himself with the potential for more socialising between the two over the weekend. They knew that Jake's DPD deliveries were always carried out Mondays to Fridays, and it was only when Jake rarely worked overtime at weekends would he miss calling in to the bar. As he was also an occasional smoker, it wouldn't be too difficult to strike up a conversation. D.I. Spencer was not totally in favour of the plan, as he felt it was not altogether ethical and could be dismissed by a court as deceitful, coercive and a form of entrapment. Jameson argued he'd already ran it past Dorset hierarchy and they'd given him the green light. What Becky must not do is suggest that physical intimacy might be on offer. All she needed to do was be friendly in a non-committed way and be wired up also, so the conversation could be recorded. So everything was set. It was Friday night. Becky Waddington was dressed to impress, but not dressed to kill, as if this incident was to be used as evidence. Any defence attorney could argue that Tomlinson had been presented with a vision of beauty, of temptation, which any man would have tried to impress with small talk, bravado and bluster. Becky had been fully briefed about Jake's penchant for the ladies and how in the past he'd been less than gentlemanly, more than a little sleazy, and had used his fists before on a previous girlfriend. Just like the COVID-19 catchphrase, she needed to stay alert. Jameson tested the equipment out from his room. "OK, Bex, are you there? Can you hear me?" Becky eased her mouth nearer towards the tiny microphone concealed under her jacket lapel and semi-whispered, "Yes, thanks, Gaffer." To which Jameson replied, "That's a nice clear signal there, Bex. Stick to the script and we'll see what girlfriend Beater's got to say for himself." Tomlinson sauntered into the bar. There were only 5 people using it. Lockdown for public places such as these had only just started to lift, and generally society had still not quite eased itself out of armchairs in front of televisions, where the entertainment and refreshments came at a fraction of the cost compared to going out. A nod to his old mate Beaumont the barman was swiftly replaced by a leering look to his right, where, propped up on a bar stool, was Becky Waddington, resplendent in striking red jacket, red lips, red beret with complimentary white top, white jeans and white stilettos. Jake Tomlinson laughed towards her direction. "You're either a massive Stoke City fan, Duck, or you work at Butlins as a redcoat. Go on, put me out my misery. Which one is it?" She was super quick with the retort. "Well, Butlins furloughed me during COVID, so I've got a meeting with the Bet365 guys tomorrow, so I can get a job at that rubbish football club you lot support." There were laughs all round. Stoke lads appreciated feisty girls. They'd always had them round there in the female-populated pottery factories. But this girl was different. For starters, she sounded like a Londoner, and anyone this far north tended to treat a London accent with reverence, as if they were a higher form of species. Jake took the bait. Get away with you. We'll be back in that Premier League before long. Give us a year or two. Anyway, who do you support? Becky answered. Myself, darling, can't be bothered with any of that, to be honest. Anyway, I'm happy to support me boss, who's actually meeting the Bet365 execs to sell them an advertising package, which will all be linked up with TV, radio, newspapers, magazines and the internet, the big five. I'll just be there in the capacity of... Tomlinson interrupted. Glamorous assistant. Is the red and white to win them over because they run Stoke Football Club? Is that the idea? Nah, I just travelled up in this as I came straight from a Virgin Media advert filming. And my boss says we'll go for the conservative look tomorrow, maybe navy blue. I think he said anyway. I'll just be there making sure the screen's set up and the PowerPoint slides move through smoothly. From 1 to bleeding 34. Won't be the most exciting meeting ever. Jake got suggestive. Why? Are you looking for excitement? Becky. Nah, I get that at home, darling. But I do like meeting new people. Anyone got a light? This was a key moment. Tomlinson fumbled through his jacket, feeling sure he'd got a lighter in there somewhere, and bingo. Here it is, I knew I'd got it. I'll join you if that's okay. Sure, darling. Becky's the name, pleased to meet you. What's yours? They stepped outside. Jake lit Becky's cigarette and noticed she really was quite attractive, possibly out of his league, but he liked a challenge. Whereabouts do you live in London then, Duck? I deliver there all the time for DPD. I know some bits like the back of my hand. Becky needed to think quickly. This could go horribly wrong. Fortunately, although she was a Dorset girl, she did have an aunt in Croydon whose husband had worked at Gatwick Airport all his life. So, on the spot, she imagined they were her parents and gave that as her backstory. After another 10 minutes, although the conversation was so mundane it felt like 30, it was time to step back inside. Jake offered to buy Becky a drink, which she accepted as it would temporarily forge some type of superficial bond between them. Becky revealed that she'd better not return to her room too late, as her boss was in the adjoining room and he'd hear her. But there was a possibility the next day she'd have a little bit more time on her hands. Becky, listen, after the big presentation tomorrow morning, my boss, Jeffrey, he'll be getting the first train back to London to see his wife and kids. Me, though, I've got an open train ticket and I can do as I please. So, Jake, if you're up for it, maybe meet again tomorrow afternoon. Give us a call. But I must admit, my boyfriend is an IT technician. He's very jealous, very paranoid, and he knows how to unlock phone records. Jake, bloody hell, sounds like you've had a string of affairs in the past. You must have given him some reason to be jealous. Quite a girl, aren't you? Becky, nah, not at all. But I was thinking, you seem of a bit of a man around town. Bit of a ladies' man, a bit of a guy who knows what the crack is, knows what the score is. Don't you fellas usually have a backup phone you use when you're on the pull? Jake, on the pull? I thought this was just your idea of meeting new people. I didn't realise either of us was on the pull, Duck. Becky flashed a sly grin. This wasn't exactly a honey trap signal, but she had to keep Jake interested if he was going to be lured into giving the game away. Becky, well, Jake, you never know in life where things are heading. Who can say? All I'm suggesting is that lads like you often have the spare phone, maybe a SIM card pay-as-you-go style, which they use for private stuff, shall we say, which they don't want flashing up on their regular phone. So, be a darling and use that one. When I get back to London, Mr. Interrogate and Mr. Control Freak, my boyfriend, can go through me phone as much as he likes, and he won't be any the wiser. I'll just say I needed to be temporarily in touch with one of the Bet365 guys who was organising the premises for the meeting. Jake, well, matter of fact, I do have another phone. I haven't used it for a couple of years now, but yeah, I can spark it up tonight and call you on that tomorrow if it's such a big thing to you. Becky didn't want Jake to rejoin Lawrence Beaumont back at the bar, as the story about the spare phone, the extra phone, might have been seized on as suspicious by Lawrence, and Jake had already explained he'd be going elsewhere for last orders that night, so she had to keep him occupied for another hour or so. She suggested to go for a drink elsewhere, as she didn't really want her boss to see her schmoozing up to another fella. As her boss gets on with her boyfriend, you see. So they walked through Festival Park. They noticed all the amenities which had been introduced here following it being the venue of the National Garden Festival back in 1986. There was an artificial ski slope, a huge indoor water park with theme park-sized slides, a cinema, a 10-pin bowling court, and retail opportunities which were all gradually, slowly opening up following the global pandemic. They arrived at the China Garden, a pub and restaurant overlooking a boating marina and next to the Trent and Mersey Canal. Becky tried to get Jake to explain all about Stoke-on-Trent and the Potteries, but had already come to the conclusion that he was a bit of a moron who knew very little in this area. Luckily, she'd read up some tourism notes on the train whilst en route to Stoke, and so actually knew more than he did. Then, as 10 o'clock approached, it was actually her seeing him off to his car to exit, knowing that he wouldn't then get chance to discuss his little date tonight with Beaumont. She wrote her phone number on his ciggy packet, kissed him on the cheek and said, "Tomorrow afternoon, it's a date. Ring me just after midday. Our meeting at Bet365 will be over by then. Nighty-night, Jake." Beaumont was already in the bag, and now they had to wait for Tomlinson to call, hopefully on the burner phone which had been used to harass Givens in 2018. Analysis of texts sent to the doomed retired teacher showed that someone with rather poor literacy skills in terms of spelling had written them, and Tomlinson certainly fitted that bill if his verbal diction was anything to go by. Next morning, Frank Jamieson and Becky Waddington had room service delivered to their respective rooms, and all there was to do was wait and wait, although Frank did run a few operational ideas past Becky. But it all hinged on that phone call. If you can ever rely on anything in life, it is that young men like Tomlinson will usually follow their indulgences and needs rather than take a more logical, meticulous route. And true to form, at just a couple of minutes past midday, the call came through on the very same number which had been used a couple of years earlier to lure Givens to his death. Becky played a blinder in keeping Tomlinson talking for a few minutes while Frank was recording it, and he had also alerted Dorset to record it just to be safe. But finally she delivered the get-out clause to Jake. "Look, it was lovely meeting you, Jake, but I've had him indoors on the blower and he wants me back down London ASAP. My taxi's booked in 5 to take me to the station. Never mind, darling. Perhaps catch you in some other lifetime or on another galaxy." As Tomlinson started to blaspheme at her about what a teaser she was, the call had already been ended on Becky's phone. So this was it. This was the evidence needed to establish the very same phone used to contact Givens was the same one in Tomlinson's possession. The plan which Jamieson had hatched with his opposite DI at Stoke, John Spencer, was that 2 uniforms would lift Beaumont and another 2 uniforms would collect Tomlinson. They'd then spend 24 hours, possibly more, trying to break them as best as possible, with an ultimate outcome being some admittance that yes, they were involved, but not as much as Harris. Saturday afternoon, Tomlinson and Beaumont were picked up at their home addresses and taken to just one holding facility where Jamieson and Spencer could alternately quiz the pair. They'd each have legal representation, sitting at 1 metre apart now that social distancing had been relaxed. somewhat, the two detectives would be facing them, tape recorders, cameras running, and everything geared up towards some sort of confession. Becky had been allowed to travel back to Dorset, her key role having been successfully completed, and a transcription of her critical phone call from Tomlinson had been prepared, along with evidence that this phone used to contact her had also been the one used to contact Jonathan Givens in Bournemouth. First to be seen was barman Lawrence Beaumont. Now, originally he'd elected to take a no-comment stance when interviewed 2 years previously, just after the murder. In fact, he'd repeated that particular pair of words 24 times, and so it would be compelling to see if he'd repeat that strategy. Lawrence had no idea what the interrogation would involve, and as Tomlinson had been brought in at precisely the same time, there'd been no opportunity to compare notes via texts, etc. Frank made his case for the prosecution very clear straight from the get-go. Frank: Lawrence, I sat opposite you in 2018 and heard you repeat the phrase "no comment" many, many times when myself and my then colleague John Dean, DI, questioned you about the killing of Paradise Hotel employee Jonathan Givens, aka Mike Radford. There was, we felt, a reasonable amount of evidence, but unfortunately for us, and most fortunately for you, the Director of Public Prosecutions deemed that we had insufficient witnesses, CCTV, motives, DNA, phone tracking, etc., etc. Mr. Beaumont, I'm sorry to tell you that scenario is no longer the case. Other information has now come to light which will secure, I am confident, a prosecution. Before we begin, do you have anything to tell us that might help our inquiry and might help your situation? Beaumont: No, still innocent, so still got nothing to say. Jameson: OK, moving on. We have two important pieces of evidence which you need to comment on. If you go hiding behind the no comment thing, I think it'll come back to haunt you when we move on to the court proceedings, and you try and explain it away then. Any jury worth its salt will assume that you must be lying because, well, if he's so open about the truth now in court, why did he not reveal it on that Saturday the 1st of August in Hanley Police Station? First piece of information. We now have solid information that in February 2018, just a couple of months before Givens' murder, 4 lasses from Stoke attended Givens' place of work. When they returned home, they posted snaps of themselves having a good time dancing, etc., with one particular photo revealing a reasonable likeness of the deceased. When you saw it on the WhatsApp page that you made very specific inquiries about the image of Givens, you took a special interest in it, in fact, and then shared it via texts to Jake Tomlinson and Francis Harris. Correct so far? No comment. Oh, God. We're not on that game again, are we? We've got your sodding phone records. It's all there, shared with Tomlinson and Harris with the phrase, "Guess who?" ? Fugitive found! Beaumont's solicitor whispered to him that it might be a good opportunity to address this. Beaumont: Okay, yes, I was a little shocked and a little excited, I'll admit. Don't forget, we're talking about the bloke who battered all 3 of us. Pain like that doesn't go away, you know, Spencer interjected. But he didn't go as far as slashing any of your throats or stabbing you deeply twice from behind, Mr. Beaumont, did he? Beaumont: We just felt that justice hadn't been served, and yeah, we were pretty pissed off. He'd done a runner, made a new life for himself, and to top it all, he's there dancing away with birds at his hotel. Never remember him dancing at any of the school discos. He was a boring bastard. And he suddenly reinvents himself as Mr. Interesting, like. Jameson: So you thought you'd do a vigilante job on him then, Lawrence, Wouldn't it have been simpler, the right thing to do, to just kind of pick up a phone and call the police? Beaumont. Well, they were never very interested first time round in nailing him, were they? And when they did eventually catch up with Givens, they let him walk away scot-free instead of putting him on remand and holding on to the twat instead of just... Spencer felt he needed to speak up on behalf of the earlier investigation at this point. Mr. Beaumont, there were various political, financial and technical difficulties surrounding the original triple ABH carried out allegedly by Mr. Givens on the three of you. I can only offer my apologies that yes, he shouldn't have been allowed to abscond, but sadly he did. However, one piece of information recently came to light. A phone call to Stoke Police on the 10th of May. We shared it with Dorset, not a particularly earth-shattering incident, but nevertheless another piece in the jigsaw, which suggests overall that the three of you did actually carry out this despicable murder. Beaumont. Go on then, surprise me, I'm all ears. Spencer. It just so happens that Friday the 8th of May 2020 was VE Day, a sun-drenched day across Britain when the general public seemed to think they'd earned the right to take a day off from lockdown and social distancing regulations. In fact, you attended a barbecue with dozens of other Etruria and ex-Etruria residents, and the invite to the party suggested on the text that you were all going to party like it's 1945 and that you're going to get wasted for Winston. It just so happens that on that night, A&E departments length and breadth of the nation were rather busy, including the one at the Royal Stoke Hospital. Do you remember the party, or were you wasted as well? Beaumont. Yeah, I went along and had a couple, so what? Not like Dominic Cummings got into any mischief for him breaking the rules, so why should I be bothered? Spencer. OK, so we've established you were there, and as the beer flowed, the 2 metre distancing became 1 metre, and even later, the 1 metre became 1 centimetre, as witnesses tell us there were couples smooch dancing, spliffs being shared, and one conversation between yourself and another reveller, one Mr. Tony McDermott. Beaumont. And? Spencer. Well, it just so happens Tony was stone cold sober, as he was on nights later that evening at the fire station, and he just popped in to be polite and show his face. Beaumont. Can't remember, did he? Spencer. He did. I'm not surprised you don't remember. It was 8 p.m. when Tony spoke to you, and you'd been enjoying the sun and liquids on offer for 5 hours by then. Beaumont. Not against the law, is it? Spencer. No, nor is singing along at the top of your voice to Captain Tom's rendition of You'll Never Walk Alone. But it's what you did just after that which is significant. Beaumont. Whoa. Spencer. Mr. McDermott said to you, just think, we're standing about 200 yards from our old primary school where we once sang that in the choir when the PE teacher Givens led a football-themed assembly. Do you remember what you said next to Mr. McDermott? No, I don't. Spencer. Givens? We sorted him out. He won't be leading any more assemblies, the shithouse. At this point, Beaumont became agitated. Bollocks, as if I'd say something like that and incriminate myself when I didn't even... Spencer. Didn't even what, Mr. Beaumont? Didn't even force the knife into Givens' back, do you mean? We know, because it was Harris. But you're very much in the frame of all this. You've helped plan it, you've provided support, and you've benefited from the whole sorry saga, financially. At this point, Jameson intervened. Lawrence, we're going to leave you to discuss matters with your solicitor. At the moment, we can have you on carrying out blackmail on Givens and on offering logistical support to the trio. Max 14 years. But with cooperation from you, we can knock that down to 7. You'd be out in 4. However, continue to deny all of this. Go to court, jury, etc. You're looking at life, mate. which is more like, I don't know, at least 10 before release, possibly 12, even more. Have a think. We've seen the texts. They suggest you'd had one lot of cash off the old teacher. A second was going to be collected, but something went pear-shaped. Have a good think. Chat to your brief. We'll see you soon. Beaumont left the room, and Jameson whispered to Spencer, "You played it clever there, John. Good, solid police work, that." D.I. Spencer replied. "And now we'll move on to our second customer, Jake Tomlinson, a legend with the opposite sex in his own imagination. The ultimate Lothario, who took a bit of a shine to your colleague, Becky. He's going to discover that one little flirtatious escapade is about to cost him rather a big chunk of his liberty. Poor lad." Once the formalities at the beginning of the interview with Jake Tomlinson had been carried out, acting DS Frank Jameson decided to make it personal. "Now, Jake, a little birdie tells me that you visit massage parlours both in Stoke and up and down the country when you're driving your delivery van." At this point, Jake's legal rep chirped up that Jake's private, personal interests and hobbies could not possibly be linked to the murder of an ex-teacher in Dorset, who happened to be on the run from the police himself, and so was not exactly himself a figure of high virtue. But Jameson continued, "Point taken, sir. I was merely attempting to establish that Jake is a bit of a one for the ladies, but you didn't need an escort girl last night, did you, Jake? Because you sorted out some female company with no payments necessary. Well, apart from that G&T you purchased." At this point, Jake seemed confused. "Were you watching or summit?" Jameson, singing the Chris de Burgh song. "Lady in red." Remember, that particular lady in red was a police colleague, and you just couldn't help it, could you? Tomlinson, "Couldn't help what? We had a fag, had a drink, and a half-hour walk around Festival Park. Don't think anyone can get arrested for that, can they?" Jameson, "No, you're right, they can't. But suppose the fella phones that same young lady up next day, well, in fact today, and that particular pay-as-you-go burner phone just happens to be the same one that... Would you like me to finish that sentence off for us all, Jake? Or would you like to do the honours?" Tomlinson, "The fucking tart, so she..." Jameson, "Yes, Jake, persuaded you to phone her on your spare phone, which hasn't been in use since, let me see, April 2018. Do you want me to read out the texts from that particular phone to Given's phone, which we only discovered recently when the Paradise Hotel was being kitted out in its new life as a retirement home? If one nosy contractor hadn't explored one loose floorboard to discover one old mobile phone not used for a couple of years, and one stash of cash which you and your boys had been dipping into, if that fella had not been so damn particular, you wouldn't be sitting here now. Weird that, isn't it?" Tomlinson, "Anyway, I got that phone from a market stall in Manchester just before we went into lockdown. Yeah? It'd be about early March." Jameson, "Manchester? That's a coincidence. That's my hometown. Which market's that then? We've got several, and I know 'em all. Which one, Jake?" Tomlinson, the little one at the back of the Arndale Centre, on that back street." Jameson, "Oh, you mean the fruit and veg one? Sorry, mate. Miss Waddington was wired up and we've got you on record as saying, I do have another phone. I haven't used it for a couple of years now, but I can spark it up tonight. You didn't purchase that phone March 2020, it was more like March 2018 or before. Again, would you like me to read out the text that you sent to Mr. Givens? You know, how the three of you wanted £1,000 each to stop you going to the police, then it was another £2,000 each, and finally I reckon Givens wouldn't go along with the third request for cash. You know, the one where you asked for another £2,000 each to take it up to 5. And your pathetic promise that, don't worry, Mr. Givens, this is our final request. You definitely, spelt with an A as in definitely instead of an I as in definitely, won't hear from us again, mate. Guess what, Jake? Your old girlfriend supplied us with letters you sent to her. And one of them says, I promise I'll definitely, spelt with an A, not smack you again, duck. How touching. How romantic. And the word definitely, yes, it is definitely spelt wrong, just as in your texts to Givens. Tomlinson, all right. You've got most of that right, but it was that mad bastard Frankie Harris who suggested the third visit to Givens should involve a weapon. Just as a frightener, like. God knows what the maniac was thinking, taking it that far. He's crackers, crazy. It's all that steroid shit going round his brain. Jameson. Jake, I'm going to offer you the same deal we offered to Lawrence Beaumont. Tomlinson. Dunna say Lazarus blabbed too. We're right in the shit now. Harris knows loads of people, bad people. We'll never be safe, never. Jameson, Jake, trust me, I'm experienced in these matters. We will present the evidence in court as if it's totally good police detection work that's driven the case this far. Blackmail, maximum sentence, 14 years. But with your cooperation, I can get that halved. You'll be out in no time. As for Harris, though, anyone who carries a blade that long and strikes so viciously from behind has to go away for a very long time. He'll possibly claim that Givens was goading him and saying stuff like, you're getting no more money from me, you can piss off back to Stoke. You were a loser as a kid, you're a loser now. We don't know. Killers often resort to the lowest excuses possible, really low, to try and get off. Or it'll be a bad batch of steroids messed with his mind. Or it was the full moon that night. Or it'll be bloody anything. They'll use anything to either get off or go for manslaughter charge instead of murder. But it won't wash. As long as you stay with the phone story and Beaumont stays with the identifying Givens in that WhatsApp selfie and he passed it on to Harris, then I think we can say that any court jury worth its weight will realise it was Harris who carried out the more significant, violent part of the operation. At this point, Tomlinson's solicitor asked for some privacy with his client, and D.I. Spencer suggested they could have as long as they wished. The two detectives chatted. Spencer, all we require is some acknowledgement that Beaumont and Tomlinson will cooperate. If we go down the blackmail route, I suspect they'll even get bail. We can do the bulk of their interviews here. Jameson, yeah, we can even offer them the choice, but Harris needs arresting ASAP, and I think we'll move him south. He won't be getting bail. I suspect we've got some great facilities in Dorset to hold people, and surely we'll be charging him in the first 24 hours anyway. I need some counter-questioning theories prepped, ready for when he starts coming off with, it wasn't me, or the other pair put me up to it, or I was suffering with PTSD at the time, and all the usual shit. But it's been great working with you, John. I know my previous DS was a bit rude to you and your former colleague, Jackson, on that Zoom meeting, or whatever they were called back then, but I've really appreciated working alongside someone methodical, analytical, rather than John Dean, who used to just sort of scream at people as if he was that big copper on Life on Mars and Ashes to Ashes. Phil Someone, the actor, did you see it? Spencer: I did, yes. The actor Phil Glenister played Detective Gene Hunt. And it runs through sort of for the 1970s and the 1980s, Mode barking out commands and threats to colleagues and crooks in equal measure. I did get the impression that your former colleague, D.S. Dean, was possibly cut from the same cloth. In less than an hour, the news filtered through that Beaumont and Tomlinson were willing to talk candidly, honestly, and with a certain level of remorse and guilt, which they'd been carrying on their shoulders for more than 2 years. Frank Jameson knew that a lot of the questioning could be carried out here by people who he'd grown to trust, as well as a couple of Dorset's team who were on their way north. But Frank Jameson also knew that Harris was going to be arrested and driven to Dorset. He decided to get one step ahead of him. He booked a car and driver so he could prepare notes, and he had all of the transcripts from Beaumont and Tomlinson fed online to him instantly. True to form, Harris kicked off as two plainclothes officers, followed by two uniformed personnel, approached him at 5:30 p.m. as he stood in security clothes at the casino's main entrance. It had only just been reopened a couple of weeks post-COVID-19, and Harris was looking forward to earning legitimate money for the first time in over 3 months. He'd been financing his life via providing muscle for a family of drug dealers who'd been collecting and delivering substantial amounts of heroin, cocaine and ecstasy to addresses in Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham and Nottingham. His reaction to the cops was standard confrontational and designed to prevent them doing their jobs. How do I know you cops? Where's your ID? Where's your warrant? Give me a reason why I'm being arrested. And I might just be a bit more cooperative, yeah? But strangely, his demeanour had softened on the long journey south. It was as if he'd spent the previous 900 days or so waiting for this one day, and now it had finally arrived. It was like the cogs in his mind were turning and churning away, mapping out his life as it stood and what his life could be like. Maybe, just maybe, this was his big opportunity to escape the twilight zone of the nocturnal underworld, populated by heavies, by drug-fueled big mouths and big heads, by ladies of a questionable disposition, and so on. What if he could give his side of the story decently, respectfully, not make excuses, just tell it like it is, speak of regret, point towards doing the right thing for once, a chance for redemption. He knew plenty of people who'd done porridge, done bird. To be honest, it didn't sound too bad at all. 3 meals, exercise, the opportunity to do some proper committed weight training instead of constantly looking at the clock because he was on his way to work. Who knows? Perhaps the chance to repeat some exams in English and maths, which he'd failed at so miserably when he was a 16-year-old at a crap comprehensive school. It wasn't a sudden epiphany, more of a sense that the forthcoming interviews were going to be more targeted than the previous ones. It got the idea that these detectives had got fresh information, which can only mean one thing. He probably wasn't going to be able to wriggle out of this one. By the time Harris had reached Dorset Constabulary's headquarters at Winthrift, he realised he was a defeated man. He was sick of playing the hard man. What he lacked in height, he certainly made up for with muscle, but he was starting to question it. This past 2 years had seen an increase in anxiety and insomnia that he'd never experienced before. He was sick of needing Charlie or Speed to stay awake all night at the casino and then sleeping tabs or weed to get to sleep. He was sick of sucking up to whoever was Mr. Big at any particular time on the drug scene. and he was sick of acting psycho around ordinary punters so they'd suck up to him. Once the interview started to delve into the whats, the whys and the wherefores, Jameson actually started to feel for the fella, a bit anyhow. He surmised that here was one no-hoper, dealt a shit pack of cards, a dad and a stepdad more concerned with playing the big I am rather than nurturing the lad with anything positive. A mum so terrified of her lovers, she always put them first, not Frank Harris. He'd been passed from pillar to post, not abused physically, but certainly mentally. Virtually illiterate and innumerate, so always felt inferior in the classroom, constantly felt undervalued and was intimidated by confidence, assertiveness and cockiness from other lads. So the only way he could prove himself was to lash out with the only skill set he possessed, punches. It started to make sense to acting D.S. Jameson, and as Harris therapeutically spilled his thoughts and feelings out into that room, it was starting to make sense to him as well. He'd run up some bad debts with some even worse people. The only way he could see out of his predicament was to view Mr. Givens as a cash cow. He reasoned that the flattened nose and cracked skull which Givens had dished out that night was worth the 5k he was trying to extract from him. But on that fateful night, something had got into Harris. He'd got people texting him with threats against his young daughter if he didn't come good in the next 7 days. He hadn't been sleeping properly for weeks. He'd stupidly had a couple of Jack Daniels and Cokes plus a couple of barbs to try and keep him calm before his meeting with Givens. And the final straw was his old school teacher, A, was goading him about the pasting he dished out in 2009. B, he was refusing to give out any more cash than what he'd already given. And C, to top it all off, he reminded Harris what a danger he'd been to his peers at school. But the parting shot Givens allegedly dished out was, "But now you're just a danger to yourself. Look at you. What a mess." And it was this that caused any sense of logical judgment to evade Frank Harris. The weapon was supposed to be just a frightener, but at that moment it became the enforcer. Jameson tried to summarise it in words that would make sense to Harris. "Listen, lad, you had numerous problems going on in your life, historically and also in the present in 2018. You were being relied upon by Beaumont and Tomlinson, who obviously saw you as the guy to put the frighteners up Givens. You had bad guys after money from you. The daughter scenario is bound to have been getting at you. And Givens, well, he had assaulted you quite nastily and cowardly in 2009. And now, in his final moments, he's goading you, he's teasing you. Maybe he was fed up of life. Maybe he saw it as his way out. We'll never know, pal. And I wish I could somehow help you, but I'm afraid that the tone and threats contained in the texts towards Givens plus the weapon, I'm afraid there probably isn't a brief in the country or a barrister who could get it downgraded to manslaughter from murder. But in my report, I will say that you were open, you cooperated, you appear to show remorse, and your story is a very important one, Francis. Get mixed up with underworld figures and eventually it sucks the joy of life out of you. One way or another, it devours all your oxygen and you've got nowhere to go. Just a series of cul-de-sacs. You can't escape. They won't let you because they're bastards. And that is a very powerful message to any young fella starting out in his adult life. Believe it or not, there were handshakes, and the two Francises, Jameson and Harris, actually thanked each other. An immense weight had been lifted from Harris's shoulders, and it was a relief he felt. To try and emulate, he was a changed man, a redeemed man. As he was led away, he turned to Jameson and said, Mr. Jameson, could you tell Loza and Jake they've got nowt to worry about, mate? The writing's been on the wall for too long. It was me that put the blade in, so it's me who should pay for it. Is that all right? Jameson, that's extremely reasonable of you, Francis. I'm sure it'll be much appreciated. I'll pass it on to the other two. Bye. Jameson was tired mentally, physically. He called in to see the team, some of whom were in the office despite it being Saturday, and he just briefly told them, it's game, set and match, guys. Just go home to your families or whatever else you do at the weekends. He then designated two of them to be in on Sunday just to collate reports and type up transcripts ready for the DPP. But before DS Jameson got into his car to see Nicky and the kids, for the first time in a while, he thought he'd better make a phone call. So as he stood on the car park at the station, it was his former colleague DS John Dean, now retired, but the guy who'd been determined virtually from day one after Given's death that it was Harris who'd carried out the deed, with the other two as accomplices. Jameson, John, how you doing, mate? I know it's Saturday evening and all that, but... Dean, bloody hell, Frankie boy. I ain't heard from you in a bit. Thought you died or something. What you been up to? Jameson, well, I've been in Stoke for a while investigating the... Dean, go on, tell me. What's happened then? It was those three twats, wasn't it? Go on, hit me with the news, mate. Jameson, John, I've wanted to call you for a bit, pal. I really have, but I'd been ordered by... Dean, by Miss fucking Fussy Pants Squires, yes. We know, my nemesis. Jameson, yes, John, you're right. I was ordered by her ladyship herself not to divulge any operational procedural stuff while it was so, ongoing and delicate. Everything was on a need-to-know basis, so I had to keep stum. I hope you understand. Dean, so, what's the verdict, maestro? Jameson, the verdict is... Drum roll, please. Harris done the job. Aided and abetted by the other two carrying out text surveillance, providing transport, etc., etc. Thanks to you and your laser-like precision, John, at predicting stuff, they did eventually blab, and it all snowballed from there. Dean, results, Frankie boy. Where are we going to celebrate them? The Dog and Duck in half an hour? Jameson, sorry, John, I ain't seen the family for a bit. I've got loads to tell you about the case, though. And you know that plonker DI from Stoke, John Spencer? He turned out to be really useful in the end. Dean, useful as in being the most boring librarian in the fucking world. Hello, pleased to meet you. I'm D.I. John Spencer. Jameson, yeah, I know, John, I know, but Little Miss Sunshine as well, Becky Warrington, she was up in Stoke with me. She did a storming job, dressed up to the nines and lured Jake Tomlinson into a honey trap jobby. Dean, Tomlinson? You mean the pervy pedo? So Becky did the business with him. I hope you filmed it, Frankie. Purely as evidence, like. Jameson, God, Johnny, you don't change much, do you, mate? Becky did a real professional job. Dean, well, it is the oldest profession, isn't it? Jameson, hey, John, credit where credit's due. She was brilliant. There's so much to tell you, but they've only just been charged, so let the media spill a bit of it out into the open, and then I'll meet you midweek, mate. I know when you retired, this case drilled into your skull a little and got you down, but hopefully this goes some way to easing that. Dean, aye, Frankie, when we get together, man, fuck the beer, we're having champagne, and it's on me. Go on, my son. Jameson, Thanks, nice one, John. See you in the week then. I'll be in touch. Enjoy that big fat cigar I know you've been saving up for this very moment. Good night, sir. Tatty bye, sweet dreams. Then it was just a short drive home for Frank Jameson. It had been a job well done, and he got an even bigger reward when he got home. A letter had arrived just that morning with some rather exciting news. So Frank would be having 2 celebrations. One with his wife Nikki to celebrate the contents of the letter, and another in midweek with the illustrious John Dean. First thing Monday morning, he'd been summoned to go over the latest Given's developments with CS Loretta Squires, and he knew she wouldn't be best pleased with everything that he'd be revealing. Jameson gingerly walked through to Miss Squire's office and immediately had a huge Moonpig card thrust in his hands by a beaming Loretta. It stated in huge bold letters, "The man, the myth, the legend, the star of the show, Dorset's finest." Loretta immediately went on a rather sycophantic appraisal of how the case had been concluded. Well, well, well. Who is indeed a clever boy then, Francis? My professional assessment of you as a leader was proven to be astute. Yes, I know you have a certain loyalty towards retired DS John Dean, but he didn't solve this case. You did. You 100% good guy. Jameson. Thank you for the accolades, ma'am. I mean, Loretta, but John had done a lot of the legwork before he retired. Then there was the forensics expert, D.I. in Stoke, John Spencer. He was a great ally. Plus, of course, your rising star, Becky Waddington. I mean, it was the team who nudged it over the finishing line this time. Squires. Nonsense. I'm having none of it. This fake modesty and humble demeanour. Ha! You are nothing less than the guy who put post-COVID tourism back on the map for Bournemouth, now that this rather nasty, ghastly episode is no longer hanging over us like a dark, satanic cloud. The higher command are so pleased with you. I mean, people were starting to say that the ridiculously exaggerated TV series Broadchurch was a true reflection of life on the South Coast. But we know different, don't we, Francis? Jameson. You're very kind, Loretta. It does feel like the one or ones we thought had got away actually didn't. We nailed them. But there's something else I need to inform you about. You see, whilst up in Stoke, DS John Spencer spoke at length to me about a DS opportunity up for grabs at Macclesfield. I know. I'm sorry, I took half a day's leave. You weren't on duty that day, so I ran it past command centre. I chatted at length to them. Me and Nicky have spoken for quite a while now about returning north. You see, Nicky's parents, they're both in their 80s, and she didn't want their last 5 years or so, maybe 10, to just slip by without their only daughter on hand to provide a bit of TLC. I mean, my parents both passed the year before last, and my only regret is that I kind of lost track of them. My fault, not theirs. So I'm afraid up north it is. Squires. But isn't up north a bit Ebar gum and smoky factories? I always think that for every 100 miles we drive north, we go backwards by 10 years. Is that fair? And I thought you worshipped the outdoors, Francis, the sea, kayaking, cycling, all of that stuff. Jameson. You're wickedly funny, Loretta. Well, I mean, do I still do loads of action stuff? True when I was in my 30s and 40s, but, you know, there is some great countryside up there too. We've got forests, we've got peaks, we've got the Lake District, there's a canoe club at Salford Quays. We'll be living closer to South Manchester to be near the in-laws, you see. It's only a 2-year secondment anyway, and after that, who knows, perhaps a bit of security consultancy work at Manchester Airport. Also, my kids have got tons of cousins up there, a ready-made network of pals, and they both fancy Manchester University eventually. It's the largest student population in Europe. I mean, the time's right, Loretta. I can't ignore the pull of returning home any longer, I'm afraid. Squires, you'll certainly be missed, Francis. I can't pretend to be happy about this, not at all. I often look at my husband, Anthony, as he mends another bloody Hornby model train, or as he listens to one more sodding opera, and I think, why can't he just be a tiny bit more like Francis Jameson? Jameson, grass is always greener though, Loretta. Think of life as a donut. The sugary, scrumptious bit round the outside, that's the sweetness of our lives, which we sometimes fail to appreciate. Often, we focus on the hole in the middle too much. Now that's the bit to ignore. Squires, a philosopher too. So simple but so true. You'll always be welcome in Dorset, Francis. Please don't be a stranger. And if we don't hear from you on a regular basis, I'm threatening that I shall contact that bloody Macclesfield police station and sing down the phone for everyone to hear. Frankie, do you remember me? Frankie. Ha! Sister Sledge, wasn't it? I think they played that at my wedding. Jameson. Right, that's a promise, Loretta. I will maintain regular contact with the Dorset guys, including you, of course, whether by email, text, Zoom, or some manner anyhow. Squires, come and give me a hug, Francis, for old time's sake. Jameson, okay, is that all right for you? Squires, that's more than all right, to be held in the arms of an Adonis, an Adonis even. Now I know what it feels like. Rather sensational and rather fabulous, in my professional judgment. Jameson, right, thank you, Mum. I best crack on with preparing the court paperwork. There is a mountain of it, and time's running out, Mum. Loretta. Squires, very well, Francis. I shall secretly cry into this box of tissues. Just go, walk out the door. I'm only teasing, of course. Goodbye. And so Frank made a hasty exit because he knew that Loretta was not teasing, and he was convinced that the box of tissues would be soaked in her tears. He found the whole episode awkward. He was almost relieved to return to his desk and prepare all the documentation for the court hearings. The trial date had been set for just 2 months forward. As all three were pleading guilty, Beaumont and Tomlinson for blackmail and Harris for murder, there would be no jury necessary, and the case was heard in a near-record 3 days. A life sentence was about to begin for Harris, whilst accomplices Beaumont and Tomlinson got 7 years each, reduced on account of their cooperation. Admittedly, life would not technically mean Harris's whole life, but nevertheless a heavy price was to be paid. To paraphrase C.S. Loretta Squires of Dorset Police, they'd taken a bit of a slapping after pub closing hours and decided to avenge it with Given's life being brutally slaughtered. Therefore, the punishment which they dished out to Givens seemed over-excessive compared to the original crime. This whole episode had begun with Given's retirement and an urge to carry out something sensational, and, for once in his life, to appear to be outside the law and not abide by the responsibilities expected of a very ordinary, very average schoolteacher. He just needed to remind himself that ordinary and average tend not to get us into trouble. It's when we seek out danger and try to be dynamic beyond our natural attributes that problems arise. Problems that can, sometimes ruin us. And so the players of this piece reflected on the whole sorry saga. If the participants could have kept within reasonable, sensible parameters, then life could have been so much sweeter. It is never fulfilling to have a story end with sorrow rather than joy. But that was what had materialised from this revenge that had finally been resolved.